Hello, and welcome to this grant writing workshop. This session is hosted by the Columbia Kootenay Cultural Alliance, or the CKCA. The CKCA is a project of the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council supported by the Columbia Basin Trust. My name is Kaylee Linz. I'm the Executive Director of the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council and CKCA. I'm joined today by Lily Anderson, CKCA's Grants Officer. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that the work of the CKCA spans the traditional territory of the Sinixt Confederacy, the Ktunaxa, the Secwepemc, the Syilx, the Laidley Tene Nations. In our work to support community cultural development, we acknowledge that we have a role to play in ensuring that all artistic disciplines and cultural practices can thrive, not just those of settler communities. This is the first presentation in a series of grant writing workshops. Today, we'll be giving you a full overview of our granting programs, eligibility, and the application process. The remaining sessions in January and February will be a little bit more informal and discussion-based. So we invite you to bring any questions related to CKCA's granting programs or how to apply to those conversations. However, if you have questions specific to your own project or organizations, we do encourage you to contact the office and schedule a consultation call. We'll talk a bit more about those later on. We anticipate launching the new CKCA funding programs on January 16th. And what we mean by that is that's the date that you could actually go into the online portal and begin your application. We encourage you to go to our website in the meantime to learn more about each funding program, and you'll be able to begin your application following the launch date. The webpage where you'll find all of this information is wkartscouncil.com/CKCA-funding. On this page, you will find the application guide, the funding guidelines, and the details on each funding program. You'll see the link there for the online portal as well. Be sure to familiarize yourself with the eligibility requirements for each of these specific programs that you're interested in applying to, as well as the overall funding policies. And make sure you go into each of the subpages to learn more about specific funding programs.
Hi, everyone. All right, so all the funding programs, except for the arts funding to communities, must be submitted by 5 p.m. Pacific on March 10th, 2023. And any required portfolio materials must be also received by our office prior to that deadline. The arts funding to communities deadline is 5 p.m. Pacific on March 3rd, 2023. And all applications for CKCA this year are submitted online via our grant management system. And all of the links for the 2023 applications will be accessed directly from the website. If you're a first-time applicant, give yourself lots of time to set up an account in the grant management system. If you already have an account, first visit the website and select the application you want to access and use your existing login. This will give you a history of all the applications you've had in the past, and also it'll add this new one to your portal. If you're applying on behalf of an organization, we recommend that you use a general organization email address, something like info@wkartscouncil.com, and not your personal email address. If you're applying on behalf of a group that is non-registered, so that's a group that's not a registered nonprofit or charity, you must apply with the individual applicant's contact information. So the focus of the CKCA funding is on arts and culture projects. So if you have a heritage project, we encourage you to look at other opportunities for support provided by the Columbia Basin Trust and Heritage BC. Applicants must reside in the Columbia Basin region for CKCA grants. This means your primary residence must be within the Columbia Basin region, and you've lived there for at least 12 months before the application deadline. And there's no disciplinary specific grants offered by the CKCA, so you're welcome to apply for arts and culture projects based in any artistic discipline or tradition, including interdisciplinary arts. So a few examples of eligible expenses would be venue rentals, equipment rentals, artist fees, salaries, or project coordination, materials and supplies, subsistence costs, so the payment of artists for the creation, performance, or exhibition of their work. That's a priority of CKCA, so be sure to include artist fees in your budget whenever possible. So marketing and promotions, there's a little caveat here with marketing and promotions expenses. They can only be a part of a broader arts and culture project. So we do not fund standalone marketing projects. For example, promotional videos that highlight your creative process. And back over to Kaylee.
Thanks, Lily. And on the flip side, I have the bad news. There are ineligible expenses that you cannot include in your projects. These include ongoing operating costs. All grants the CKC offers are project grants. We do not provide any operating funding, nor can CKCA funding be used to reduce organizational deficits. Retroactive funding. So the CKCA funding year begins June 1st. Any project activities included in your application must take place on or after that date. Note that each program has different eligible timelines in terms of when your project can finish. So take note of when your project must also be completed. Any project for which the primary outcome is not artistic or cultural activity. So an example of that may be art therapy or campaigns that are primarily around issue or environmental awareness, but the primary outcome is not focused on cultural and artistic creation. Any questions about any of these things, call our office and we're happy to clarify further. School-based activities. It's okay if your project utilizes a school as a venue, but it cannot be a curriculum-related activity or part of regular school activities. And the reason for that is the CKCA also supports artistic activity in schools directly by supporting Art Starts in Schools, which is a separate organization, and they have some fantastic opportunities if you're an artist who's interested in working directly in a school environment. We will direct you straight to them to see what their up-to-date opportunities are. But as far as CKCA projects, those cannot involve school activities. And lastly, capital expenditures are ineligible unless explicitly outlined within their program guidelines. We'll talk more about the minor capital grants that we offer a little bit later. And there's a small allowance for some project expenses in a few other programs as well. So read the guidelines carefully on that one. And a few tips on your budget. No matter what project you're applying for, you will have a budget to complete as part of that application process. Make sure you use the CKCA budget form provided for that. And it's very critical that your revenues and expenses must balance, meaning the amount you receive from all sources, including CKCA, is the same as what you spend on the project. So make sure that balances to the dollar. Be sure to include only revenues and expenses related to the project activities described in your application. So if your project is part of a larger initiative or series, do not include those other activities in your application or budget. Be careful not to include ineligible expenses, like the ones that we just described, as the inclusion of ineligible activities anywhere in your application will make the entire application ineligible, and that goes for your budget as well. So make sure that there's no mention of any ineligible categories. A reminder to include the amount you are requesting from the CKCA as revenue on the line provided. There's a specific spot that asks you to write in what your grant request is. And you're welcome to include in-kind donations in your budget. Be sure to reflect the in-kind contribution in both the revenue and expense categories. So the actual donation shows in your revenue what that contribution is going towards. That should be reflected in your expenses. And if your project involves the sale of original artistic or cultural work, you must include projected proceeds of sales in your budget as a source of revenue as well.
And so now I'm going to go over each program specifically, starting with our community grants, which are called Arts Funding to Communities. This is our smallest grant, but also our most flexible grant available. If you're an individual artist and a first-time applicant, we recommend you start with this one. There's some key differences between this grant and the others that we offer. So yeah, and these applications are assessed by a local adjudicating committee within your community, and it's assembled by your local arts council. So before moving on to the steering committee, there's a first pass of these applications through the local community adjudication. So when you apply, you'll need to tell us which arts council your local council is based on your location. Or if you're applying to a different community, which you're eligible to do, you just have to list which community that is that you're applying to. So in prior years, your application was submitted directly to the Arts Council in your community or the community you're applying to. But for 2023 and 24, we have some exciting news. You'll be submitting your application online directly to the CKCA, and we'll take care of getting your application to where it needs to go for adjudication. So you'll be using the grant system just like all the other applications. So next is our minor capital arts grants, and they support the development and preservation of arts and culture venues and support the capital needs of arts and culture organizations. Examples of capital projects may include purchasing equipment, computers, software, instruments, theater risers, presentation cabinets or fixtures. These grants can also support the renovation or building of facilities as well as lighting and acoustical upgrades. So this is a very unique application and grant. So yeah, it's only made for organizations, registered organizations. So if you have questions about that one, give us a call because it is specific to just capital purchases and renos and such. So next is the touring grants, and this supports tours. So the goal of this grant is to help individuals and grants or groups tour productions, exhibitions, workshops in the basin, and to increase public awareness of basin arts and culture productions. You may include a maximum of 2 tour locations outside of the Columbia Basin within your proposal, but most locations must be inside the Columbia Basin to be eligible for funding. Our grants for mentoring and master classes, it's our next category here. They're open to groups looking to support the artistic development of artists in the region. So these grants are specifically geared towards providing learning opportunities for emerging professionals. And the master classes must be provided by instructors or mentors who are recognized professionals in their field. And the next one is Major Project Arts and Culture. And this supports the creation of large-scale arts and culture projects that further the directions of CKCA and the Columbia Basin Trust. So projects may include the creation of artistic works, bodies of work, arts and culture performances, events, or other initiatives on a major scale. To ensure that your project meets the criteria for a major project, we recommend that you contact the office to discuss your project with us first. There's some similarities between this project or this program and the Arts Funding to Communities program. So often, if for some reason there's an eligibility issue or something in the major project, we may lead you back to the Arts Funding to Communities application. Just related to scale sometimes. You'll also be required to have some other funding sources in the major project application. So in order to make it a major project, you need to have additional funding sources attached to that project as well. So lastly is Arts Evolution. And the Arts Evolution grants are open to registered organizations to fulfill one of the following objectives. So to present the work of basin artists or an artist or artists, so could be either, create new works, and to undertake organizational development projects and workshops that'll improve arts and culture organization structure, evolution, and the capacity to serve communities. So this is really kind of like to build up the organization. There's some great examples out there. One in particular is on the cover of our Articulate magazine this year. So feel free to call us and ask questions about that one as well. It's a little bit, it's specific as well. So each of these programs have additional eligibility details, so make sure to read the guidelines that we'll be posting on the website. And yeah, so you're definitely going to want to read through the policies first, because each program has specific ones attached to it. So the final granting decisions for all of these programs are made by the steering committee, the CKCA steering committee. And who is the steering committee, you might ask? This is a group of volunteers who have a diverse range of experience in the arts, nonprofits, and community initiatives. And each member is elected for a 2-year term. And while nominated by their local arts council, they're tasked with asking or acting in the best interest of the residents of the entire basin. So the Columbia Basin Trust approves the steering committee's recommendations before we issue funding contracts for approved projects. But the final stage of all of the adjudications is everything goes through the steering committee. And then, of course, the Columbia Basin Trust will do the final approval, but anything that's recommended to them usually is good to go. And back to Kaylee.
Thanks for all that, Lily. Okay. So I just have a brief reminder about the arts funding to community grants for this year. They must be submitted directly to the CKCA through our online management system. If you do have any accessibility needs, issues with internet access, anything like that, call our office. We're happy to provide you with paper copies as well. But we do have the application for arts funding to communities available to everyone online this year. Just some additional considerations. Before you apply, make sure that you do not have any outstanding requirements for previous grants with the CKCA. That may make you ineligible for funding, so just double check that you don't have any reports due to us or anything like that. If you're a first-time applicant, make sure you give yourself time to set up an account in the grant management system. There's sort of 2 pieces. You need to make sure your account is active and ready to go, and then open and begin your application process. If you have an account, please use your existing login. And if you're applying on behalf of your organization, I think Lily mentioned this already, we do recommend that you use a general organization email address and not your personal email. And if you're applying on behalf of a group that is non-registered, so not a registered nonprofit or charity, you must apply with an individual applicant's contact information, as that's who the contract will ultimately be made out to. And a reminder just to abide by provincial health guidelines and delivery of artistic and projects. As those continue to evolve, we ask that you stay on top of all of those recommendations. And a final note here, schedule a consultation with CKCA staff to ensure you can chat through your project and just make sure that you're very clear on which project to apply to, and we can clarify any questions that you may have around eligibility or anything like that. If you go to the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council website as well, you can find lists of past funded projects. There's not a ton of detail, but sometimes it does help to see lists of the kinds of projects that have been funded under each project. So I do recommend that you take a look at some of those previous funded project lists also if you're sort of debating where your project might fit. Just a reminder again that our office can only speak about submitted applications with individuals named in the application. So if you're working with a grant writer or a collaborator in another organization, please call or email us to provide authorization for them to speak on your behalf. And just some general best practices to keep in mind when you're writing grants, whether for the CKCA or the Canada Council, the BC Arts Council, any grant application that you're working on. Try to keep in mind the 5 W's. That's a term that comes from journalism. It's the who, what, where, when, and why. I got all of them right, Lily? The who, what, where, when, why of everything that makes a good story. Make sure you're filling in all of the gaps and really providing a full picture for the assessment committee. And it's really think about telling your story, telling the story of the project that you're looking to communicate. We have an H in there as well. That's the how. Make sure you tell us all of the steps that you're going to go through to produce this project. And I also recommend that you think about an I. What is the impact that you will have on the cultural community if you are successful with this project? In line with that, make sure you ask yourself, how will I measure the success of this project? I think there's a specific question in the application as well that asks you to think through how you're going to measure the success of the project. We've heard that that's a really helpful process for artists as well when they're thinking through how to put their project together. And secondly, ask yourself, is this project realistic and achievable? As much as the CKCA wants to fund ambitious, exciting projects, it's also critical that the scale of them is within the capacity of the individual or the organization applying. So that's part of the assessment process, is also asking, based on the resources available, based on the collaborators, based on everything that's laid in the project plan, is this a grant that we anticipate being completed? And lastly, a recommendation to share your writing with a friend or a collaborator. It's just great to run it by someone to say, is this clear? Do you understand the objectives and all of the steps that we're going to go through to complete this project? And as we wrap up this presentation, firstly, thank you to you for tuning in. And we would also like to thank the Columbia Basin Trust for their support of these workshops and the granting programs themselves. As Lily alluded to earlier, the CKCA is a fund delivery partner of the Columbia Basin Trust, and the CKCA is just one way that the Trust supports community-driven initiatives throughout the basin. So we do encourage you to take a look at some of the other granting programs that they offer as well throughout the year. A lot of them are not art specific, but a lot of them do welcome arts projects as well. So if you're looking for different projects that you're interested in having funded, always great to reach out to the Trust as well. And if you have any questions about CKCA granting programs, do not hesitate to reach out. Lily will pick up your call, and she answers. She's got the answers to 99.99% of things, I would say. I try my best.
I'll be able to help people with their the folks that have applied through arts funding to communities in the past may through the community grants, they may need help setting up a portal account, because it'll be the first time for that. So this is a big step for us, having this new application online. So yeah, feel free to reach out, ask questions, make an appointment with me, and we'll get you started.
Totally. And if you have any questions right now, you're likely watching this in a recorded format. So do register for a grant writing workshop coming up, and we'll be happy to have more of a discussion at that time. We look forward to seeing your applications.
Thanks, everyone.